So today I want to talk a bit about what the best lubricants are for your skate bearings, which lubricant I recommend, and I want to give some reasonings behind that. So to begin with, there's a number of really good lubricants you can get for your bearings. The one that's got a lot of attention right now is the lubricant, the grease that they actually use in Zealous bearings. Zealous bearings have gotten pretty popular over the past few years, and they're really highly recommended from a large number of riders and communities out there. And the grease that they use is called Archoil 8300 or AR 8300. And it's a very, very good grease, but it's also extremely expensive. For a tube this big, which is I think 14 ounces, it is, I believe, about $75 for the Archoil stuff. It's very expensive grease, but very good. You could go that route and get that stuff if you have the demands for that type of performance. But that is not my recommendation for a couple of reasons. Another really good grease that I was exploring for a while that I think has the potential to have performance close to the Archoil stuff is it's SuperLube's high pressure silicone grease. And that is chock full of PTFE, which is Teflon. But the lubricant I recommend is actually this stuff, which is Schaeffer's 274 number 2. And the number 2 is the thickness of the grease. So the reason I recommend this, first of all, while the Archoil stuff is $75 for a tube, the SuperLube is about $30 a tube. This stuff is $7 or $8 a tube. In fact, it's often sold as an add-on item on Amazon. So for $7 or $8, which is in the ballpark of what you pay for a bottle lubricant like this, you can get an entire tube of this Schaeffer's 274. The other reason I recommend this grease is because it is waterproof. That is very, very important, I believe, for a lot of people, and they just don't know that. So I'm recommending a waterproof grease. This is one of the things that I think this has an edge over the Archoil 8300 is how waterproof it is. Next reason I recommend this grease, and this stuff has Moly in it, which is molybdenum disulfide. And what that is it is a friction reducer. And basically what it's these nanoparticle beads of molybdenum disulfide. So it's kind of like graphite lubricant. You know, you have a dry lubricant graphite, and but it's suspended in this grease. And it kind of works the same way. It's the same kind of principle. But here they've controlled the size of the particles in such a way to give it the best performance. And what this stuff does is it will actually, the molybdenum will actually bind to the surface of the bearings and the metal and will form a solid layer coating that has a low friction on it. So you'll have this low friction coating, and as it wears down, a new layer will build up. So it's a softer layer than the steel, but it kind of becomes a sacrificial wear layer that protects the balls and the races from damage, while also making it roll faster. And then the last thing I like about this stuff is that it's an aluminum complex grease. So that's the reason why it's so waterproof. Is it has so what you have is you have a synthetic oil, and then to make it into grease, you have to thicken that oil. And so it uses a type of aluminum compound. I'm not sure what it is. It's an aluminum soap is what they call it. And it thickens the grease. And there's different types of different thickeners you can use for different greases. So the one you're probably going to be most familiar with is lithium soap for lithium greases. Most bearing lubricants, commercial, not skate bearing, but like industrial bearing or wheel bearings or for your car or for whatever, almost all those lubricants are going to be lithium-based lubricants. Then you have fumed silica as a thickener, and that's what both the Archoil 8300 uses and the SuperLube high pressure uses, fumed silica. But the aluminum has two advantages. It's waterproof on its own, but it also takes in waterproofing additives really well. But the other thing I like is it's a very efficient thickener. You can use very little thickener to thicken a lot more oil. So the lubricant to thickener ratio is really good in aluminum greases. And that's really good. The other thing that's also good, I'm kind of going on and on here, is it's also very temperature stable. So as the temperature goes down or up, the bearings get really hot or really cold, the properties of the grease does not change very much. So it's the bearings are not going to behave differently as they heat up as you're 10 minutes into a downhill run, or in the winter when you're riding and it's colder. It's going to be the same properties and the same thickness that you're going to be experiencing. The one downside, though, with greases, and I always recommend for most people, unless you really know what you're doing and you know what you want, I'm going to recommend a grease. And but the problem with greases is that they're really hard to apply. So if you have this tube and just chuck full, how are you going to get that into your bearing? And normally what I do is I end up getting like a little tool or like a popsicle stick and spreading it in and making a huge mess. But I've come up with another solution, and that's what these are for here. So I did all this bearing research, or this lubricant research, by the way, in development of this stuff. So this is just some grease I'm going to be selling around the neighborhood to kids who aren't taking very good care of their boards, and I want them to be able to take care of their stuff. So that's what this is for. But so I came up with this, and the idea with this is I've taken the grease and I've suspended it in paint thinner. For this particular grease, it can be suspended in paint thinner pretty well. Other greases, you have to suspend it in different thinners. But basically the idea is this is about 20% thinner and the rest of it is the grease. So I can put it into this squeeze bottle and then I can apply it into a bearing much more easily, like that. And then what happens is that the paint thinner evaporates over a couple hours, and what you're left with is a much thinner layer than you otherwise would have of grease inside the bearings that's coating everything, and it's able to seal up these gaps between the shields and the seal and the races. So what you're able to do is you have the benefit of this thick grease that can seal everything up and protect the bearings and stay in place and be waterproof, but you can still apply it really easily. The downside to this idea is then before you can ride the bearings or before you can push them hard, you have to wait several hours for the thinner to evaporate. But that's a trade-off, but I think it's a pretty good one to explore. So I guess I've kind of gone off on a tangent with that. But yeah, the recommendation is the 274. If you want to have a method of applying heavy greases more easily, you can explore this tube method, or not this tube method, this suspended grease method. You can get these needle bottles for like $10 for $3 on Amazon. Really, really cheap. And I really love these bottles. So here, I've got a bunch more. And I keep all my different greases in these types of bottles now. So I'll have a bottle of 3-in-1. I'll have a bottle of bicycle chain grease. I'll have a bottle of my other greases. And I'll have some with... I have like 5 or 6 different bottles with different greases in them for different applications. And it's very, very useful. The thinner stuff, like the oils, I don't have to thin either. So I guess that's about all I have to say. I've kind of rambled on a bit here. I'm selling this stuff around town in the neighborhood, but you don't have to buy this stuff. In fact, I'm not even selling this online. You can just buy the Schaeffer's 274, and you get the benefit of all the research I put into this without having to buy that. Get this. It's really good. Longboard technology, over and out.